Hello there, Golden Bears. Thank you to ASB and BSU for inviting me here to share a little bit about Black History Month. I am Mr. Vomsteeg, and today I'm going to be presenting to you a two-part series of two gentlemen that lived during the time of post the Civil War. We call it the Reconstruction. And during that time, they were both educated when the laws and the practices of America were not kind and generous to any African American. We called them the Jim Crow laws. And they both went to a public system that then eventually they both went off to college. And another common interest they have between each, they both were from Georgia. Yet both of them, at the end of their lives and part of their career, was spent arguing for the same thing, but having two different approaches about how that should be accomplished. An illustration might be is that I perhaps might like listening to the Beatles, and another person might perhaps like listening to the Who, both coming from England area and the country of England, and often singing about the same thing. We might often get caught up in the fact that you're a Beatles fan and I might be a Who's fan, but in this situation, it's still about music. And the big thing that we need to be mindful of in this modern time is, as we continue to find ways to reconcile, let's keep and bear in mind that it's the bigger picture that we're going after and not becoming bogged down and maybe into the idiosyncrasies of things. And so with that, I would like to focus today on Booker T. Washington, the man that you see here in front of us. Again, as I've said, Booker T. Washington was educated in this thing called the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a program started after the Civil War to give African American youth an opportunity to become educated. He then went from there in the Tuskegee educational system, where he learned and became a teacher and a big influencer of the advocates of early civil rights movement. They didn't call it that then yet, but it was just as an advocate. It was there that he began going on a speaking and tours to go about and encourage African Americans to join in the movement of being not only educated, but becoming contributors to public society through hard work, through gaining new jobs and new opportunities. And I'm going to give you a few quotes from his speech there. He basically called for the African American experience, that progress for the African Americans would come gradually and could not be forced. A second thing that he argued for is that if for both whites and African Americans could be as separate as fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. Ultimately, he believed that change would happen slowly. Ultimately, believed that change would happen as the African American experience began to, earn their way into society and would be slowly adopted into the culture of its present South and in the North. Now, there were definite detractors of this, and one of them is going to be a person I talk about tomorrow or whenever they show it next, and in which, ultimately, this is kind of a derogatory way of saying that this is making the African American experience seem to be rather inferior in status. And so, in closing, I want to just remind you that in the early days, didn't mean that everybody was agreeing. In the early days, didn't mean that everybody would have a common stance. But one thing they were striving for is the advocacy of the human experience and the advocacy of rights that all people should have. So again, Booker T. Washington is his name, an early rights advocate for the African American experience, and I would hope you would go examine and learn more about him on your own.